The soft chime of the doorbell echoed through La Belle Epoque, a restaurant known for its exclusivity and opulence. Clara Thompson, a petite elderly woman, stepped inside with quiet determination. Her gray coat was frayed at the edges, and her shoes bore the scuff marks of years of use. In one hand, she carried a small cloth bag, and in the other, a simple wooden cane. Her silver hair was neatly combed back, and despite her humble attire, her posture exuded dignity. As Clara walked toward the reception desk, the opulence of the restaurant unfolded around her. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above the diners, casting a golden glow on the marble floors. Waiters in tailored uniforms glided between tables, serving dishes plated like works of art. The air was heavy with the scent of truffle oil, roasted lamb, and freshly baked bread. The hostess, a tall woman with an air of practiced indifference, glanced up from her podium. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows lifted in surprise as her eyes scanned Clara from head to toe. "May I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but tinged with skepticism. Clara offered a gentle smile. "Yes, I have a reservation. The name is Clara Thompson." The hostess hesitated, her fingers hovering over the sleek touchscreen. After a moment, she found the name and with visible reluctance gestured toward a table. "Right this way," she said, her voice flat. Clara followed, her cane tapping softly against the floor. The table was small and positioned near the back of the restaurant, far from the grand windows and central seating area. Clara didn't seem to mind. She thanked the hostess, took her seat, and unfolded the crisp white napkin onto her lap. She picked up the menu and began to peruse it with the calm demeanor of someone who had seen much and been fazed by little. Around her, however, the atmosphere was shifting. Seated at a nearby table, a group of young diners had taken notice of Clara. Dressed in designer clothing, their laughter and conversation had been lively until her arrival. Now, their focus shifted to the elderly woman in the corner. "Did she just wander in from the streets?" A woman in a sleek black dress whispered, her voice loud enough to carry. Her companion, a young man with meticulously styled hair, chuckled. "Maybe she's here to ask for leftovers. Who books a reservation here looking like that?" Their remarks, delivered with the gleeful malice of the entitled, drew more laughter from the table. The sound rippled across the room, a contrast to the usual murmur of polite conversation. Clara, however, gave no indication that she had heard them. She sat quietly, studying the menu as if she were the only person in the restaurant. But their whispers continued. "Do you think she even knows what truffle risotto is?" One of them quipped. Another leaned closer, a smirk on her face. "Let's hope she has enough for water, at least." Despite the blatant mockery, Clara's calm never wavered. She took a sip of water from the glass in front of her, the faintest trace of a smile on her lips. It wasn't the smile of someone unaware. It was the smile of someone far above the petty cruelty of others. Yet, the staff had also taken note of the scene. The hostess exchanged glances with a waiter, both of them shaking their heads slightly. One waiter muttered under his breath, "Why do people like her even come here?" Minutes later, the hostess returned to Clara's table, her professional demeanor slipping into something colder. She held a menu in one hand, but didn't set it down immediately. Instead, she leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a condescending murmur. "Ma'am, I just want to make sure you're aware that our prices are quite elevated. It's not too late to cancel if you're having second thoughts." Clara looked up, meeting the hostess's gaze with serene eyes. "Thank you for your concern," she said, her voice gentle, "but I'm quite sure of my reservation." The hostess hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. Finally, she placed the menu on the table and walked away, muttering something under her breath. As Clara flipped through the menu, the whispers from the nearby table of young diners grew louder. The group seemed emboldened by the staff's treatment of her. "What do you think she'll order?" "A side salad?" one joked, eliciting more laughter. By now, the judgment in the room was palpable. Waiters glanced at Clara from the corners of their eyes, some with disdain, others with mild curiosity. Even the manager, a stocky man in a tailored suit, peeked out from the kitchen doors, his brows furrowed as he assessed the unexpected guest. Clara remained undisturbed. After a few moments, she reached into her cloth bag and retrieved an old mobile phone. The sight of it, a relic compared to the sleek devices on every other table, drew fresh chuckles from the young diners. Ignoring them, Clara dialed a number. Her voice was calm but firm as she spoke into the phone. "Daniel," she said, "I need you to come to La Belle Époque. I'm having dinner, but it seems I may require your assistance." She ended the call and placed the phone back into her bag. The young diners, who had been snickering moments before, exchanged puzzled looks. Who was this woman? And more importantly, who was Daniel? Unbothered by the growing tension around her, Clara resumed studying the menu, her poise unshaken. As Clara waited, her tranquil demeanor began to cast a subtle ripple across the restaurant. The young diners, once so eager to mock her, now sat in uneasy silence, sneaking glances her way. Something about her unbothered confidence seemed out of place. Who could she possibly be to maintain such composure in the face of blatant humiliation? The manager, sensing the tension, decided to intervene. He approached Clara's table with a practiced smile, his hands clasped in front of him. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, his tone cordial but laced with veiled doubt. "Is everything to your satisfaction so far?" Clara looked up, her calm eyes meeting his. "Everything is fine, thank you. I've placed a call to my associate. He'll be joining me shortly." The manager's smile faltered. "I see," he said slowly, unsure how to respond. "Well, if there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to ask." He turned to leave, but Clara's voice stopped him. "Actually," she said, her tone polite but firm, "I do have a request. When my guest arrives, please ensure he is treated with the respect befitting his position." The words were simple, but there was an authority in her voice that made the manager pause. He nodded quickly, muttering, "Of course, ma'am," before retreating. At the nearby table, the young diners were openly speculating now. "Her associate?" one of them whispered. "What, is she calling her grandson to come bail her out?" Another laughed, though it sounded more forced this time. "Maybe it's her lawyer. She's probably suing for emotional distress over the menu prices." Despite their attempts at humor, an undercurrent of uncertainty had begun to creep into their voices. Not long after, the doors to the restaurant opened with a low chime. The sound of polished shoes against the marble floor drew every eye toward the entrance. A tall man in an impeccably tailored navy suit strode in, his presence commanding the room. His sharp features and confident gait exuded authority, and his sleek black car, visible through the restaurant's glass facade, hinted at wealth and power. This was Daniel Hughes, CEO of Hughes Enterprises, a name that carried weight in business circles. His arrival sent a ripple through the staff, who exchanged hurried glances. Even the hostess, who had been so dismissive of Clara earlier, suddenly stood straighter, her demeanor transforming into one of eager professionalism. Daniel's piercing gaze scanned the restaurant before landing on Clara. His expression softened immediately. He approached her table with purpose, a faint smile curving his lips. "Mother," he said warmly, bending down to place a gentle kiss on her cheek. "I'm sorry I kept you waiting." Clara returned his smile, her earlier serenity now tinged with quiet satisfaction. "You're here now, Daniel. That's all that matters." The staff froze. "Mother?" The whispers among the young diners ceased abruptly. All eyes were on Daniel and Clara, the realization of their connection dawning with stunning clarity. The manager was the first to recover. Rushing forward, he greeted Daniel with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Mr. Hughes, what a surprise and an honor to have you here. If we had known you were coming." Daniel held up a hand, silencing him. "I'm not here for pleasantries," he said, his voice cool and authoritative. "I'm here to ensure my mother has the evening she deserves. From what I've seen so far, that hasn't been the case." The manager's face turned pale. "Oh, no, sir," he stammered. "There must be some misunderstanding." "Save it." Daniel cut him off, his tone icy. "I'll deal with you later." With the staff silenced, Daniel turned his attention back to Clara. "Have you ordered yet?" he asked gently. Clara shook her head. "Not yet. I thought it best to wait for you." Daniel nodded and flagged down a waiter, who hurried over, trembling slightly. "Bring us the chef's tasting menu," Daniel said without looking at the man, "and a bottle of your finest Rheinest red." The waiter nodded hastily, nearly tripping over his feet as he rushed to comply. The rest of the restaurant watched in stunned silence, the once mocking young diners now sinking into their seats, their expressions a mix of embarrassment and fear. As the first course arrived, Daniel turned to Clara, his voice softening. "I'm sorry you had to deal with this, Mother. You shouldn't have been treated this way." Clara placed a hand on his arm. her touch gentle but firm. "It's not the first time, Daniel, and it won't be the last. People often judge what they don't understand. What matters is how we respond." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And I will respond," he said firmly. "This establishment will learn that respect isn't optional." The young diners, now thoroughly cowed, exchanged panicked looks. One of them, the woman in the black dress, finally mustered the courage to speak. "Mr. Hughes," she stammered, we didn't mean anything by it. We were just joking." Daniel's sharp gaze cut her off mid-sentence. "Joking?" he repeated, his tone lethal. "At my mother's expense? Tell me, do you find it funny now?" The woman flushed deeply and sank back into her chair, unable to meet his eyes. The rest of the group sat frozen, their earlier arrogance replaced by abject humiliation. The mood in the restaurant had shifted entirely. Clara, unbothered by the drama unfolding around her, picked up her fork and began to enjoy her meal. Her quiet dignity, combined with Daniel's fierce defense, left an impression that no one in the restaurant would soon forget. As Clara savored the first course, the restaurant's oppressive tension remained palpable. The staff tiptoed around the table, pouring wine and presenting dishes with utmost care, desperate to avoid further ire from Daniel Hughes. The young diners remained in their seats, their heads bowed, pretending to focus on their plates, while stealing anxious glances at Clara and her formidable son. The door to the kitchen swung open, and a man in his late 40s emerged, his white chef's coat crisp and spotless. Chef Antonio Romano, the culinary genius behind the restaurant's celebrated reputation, approached their table. Despite the situation, Antonio's expression was calm, his demeanor professional but earnest. "Mrs. Hughes," he began, inclining his head respectfully, "it's an honor to have you here this evening. I deeply regret any inconvenience or disrespect you've experienced. Please allow me to personally apologize on behalf of my staff." Clara looked up, her serene smile returning. "Thank you, Chef Romano. Your presence is appreciated, though I'm certain the fault does not lie with you." Antonio's gaze flickered briefly toward Daniel, whose steely expression had yet to soften. "Mr. Hughes, if I may, I assure you this incident is not reflective of our values. I hope to make amends." Daniel studied him for a long moment before giving a curt nod. "Then do so," he said, his tone clipped. "Ensure my mother's evening is flawless from here on." Antonio bowed slightly and left to oversee the next course. The staff, emboldened by their chef's calm leadership, seemed to regain some composure, though the diners still watched the Hughes table with a mix of fear and awe. As dessert was served, Daniel leaned back in his chair, his sharp features still shadowed by tension. Clara, ever perceptive, reached across the table and placed her hand on his. "You've done enough, my son," she said gently. "Let it go now." Daniel's brow furrowed. "I can't, Mother. They disrespected you, treated you like you were insignificant. That can't go unaddressed." Clara chuckled softly, her voice rich with understanding. "You've always been my protector, Daniel, and for that, I'm grateful. But respect isn't something you can force. It's something you command by how you carry yourself." He frowned. "And you carried yourself with grace, as you always do. But people like that," he glanced toward the young diners, "need to be taught a lesson." Clara shook her head. "Lessons are best taught by example, not retaliation. Those young people embarrassed themselves tonight, not me. Their behavior reflects their own insecurities, not my worth." Her words hung in the air, powerful and irrefutable. Daniel exhaled deeply, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "You're right, as always," he admitted, "but it doesn't make it easier to stomach." Clara smiled warmly. "That's because you have a good heart, my dear. You care too much to stand by when you see injustice. That's a strength, not a weakness." As the meal came to a close, Daniel stood and helped Clara with her coat. The restaurant, still quiet and watchful, parted like the Red Sea as the pair made their way toward the exit. The young diners dared not look up, their earlier bravado now thoroughly extinguished. The manager, pale and visibly sweating, approached nervously. "Mr. Hughes, Mrs. Hughes," he stammered, "please accept tonight's dinner as a token of our apology." Daniel paused, his piercing gaze fixing on the manager. "This isn't about money," he said coldly. "It's about integrity. I suggest you and your staff reflect on that." The manager nodded hastily, his head bobbing like a marionette. "Yes, of course. Thank you, sir." Clara, ever gracious, inclined her head. "Good night," she said simply, her voice as calm and steady as ever. As they stepped outside, the cool evening air enveloped them. Daniel escorted Clara to the sleek black car, holding the door open for her before sliding into the driver's seat. Once inside, Daniel glanced at his mother, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You know," he said, "you have a way of humbling even the most arrogant of people without lifting a finger." Clara laughed softly. "Wisdom, my dear, is the sharpest tool of all." As the car glided away into the night, the restaurant's patrons were left to reflect on what they had witnessed, a powerful display of dignity, strength, and grace that would not soon be forgotten. The ride home was quiet, but not heavy, the hum of the car's engine filling the silence as mother and son contemplated the night's events. Clara rested her hands on her lap, her gaze distant yet serene. Daniel, ever the strategist, was still working through his emotions, his grip on the steering wheel firm but no longer tense. "I've always believed in leading by example," Clara said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was thoughtful, carrying the weight of years of wisdom. But tonight reminded me just how rare that belief is. Daniel glanced at her, his expression softening. "Not rare for you, Mother. You've been the example my entire life." Clara smiled but didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned to look out the window, the city lights painting patterns on her face. After a pause, she said, "It's not about being seen as strong, Daniel. It's about being strong, quietly, without demanding recognition. Strength isn't shouting the loudest. It's standing firm when others falter." Daniel nodded, taking her words to heart. His mother had always been a lighthouse in his life, guiding him with her unshakable principles. He respected her even more for how she had handled the situation tonight, with poise that spoke louder than his own protective anger ever could. The next day, news of the Hughes family's evening at La Galleria had spread like wildfire. Social media was abuzz, with diners posting snippets of the dramatic events. Many praised Clara Hughes for her grace under pressure, while others criticized the behavior of the younger diners and the restaurant staff. A particularly striking photo of Clara seated at the table, her head held high, had gone viral. The image was paired with captions like "dignity personified" and "strength is silent but powerful." At his office, Daniel sat at his desk, scrolling through the endless commentary. The responses were a mix of admiration for his mother and criticism of his own actions. Some thought his stern demeanor was overbearing, while others lauded him for standing up for Clara. His assistant, a young man named Eric, knocked lightly on the door and entered. "Mr. Hughes," he said, holding a tablet. "You'll want to see this." Daniel raised an eyebrow and took the tablet. It displayed an open letter from Chef Antonio Romano, posted on La Galleria's website. The letter read, "To our guests and the community. Last night, we had the honor of serving Mrs. Clara Hughes, a woman whose grace and composure humbled everyone present. Unfortunately, the evening did not begin as it should have. Mistakes were made, mistakes that we, as a team, deeply regret. Mrs. Hughes reminded us that respect is not demanded but earned through one's actions. Her quiet strength left an indelible mark on all of us. For that, we are grateful. La Galleria is committed to reflecting on this incident and ensuring that every guest, regardless of status, is treated with the dignity they deserve. To the Hughes family, and especially to Mrs. Hughes, thank you for teaching us a lesson in humanity. Sincerely, Antonio Romano, Executive Chef, La Galleria." Daniel read the letter twice, his expression unreadable. Then, with a sigh, he leaned back in his chair and smiled faintly. His mother had done it again, changed hearts and minds without ever raising her voice. At her home, Clara sat in the garden, a book resting on her lap. The sunlight danced through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on her face. She was not one to dwell on events once they had passed, but the previous night had stayed with her. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. It was a message from Daniel. "Mother, you were right. Again. The restaurant apologized publicly. I'll send you the link. Love, Daniel." Clara smiled, her heart warmed by her son's words. She didn't need the link or the apology. What mattered to her was the lesson, not just for the restaurant or the unruly diners, but for Daniel, who was learning to temper his passion with wisdom. As she set the phone down, her thoughts drifted to the young people at the restaurant. She hoped they had reflected on their actions. Perhaps her example had planted a seed, a small but potent reminder of the power of respect and humility. In the weeks that followed, the story of Clara Hughes's quiet strength continued to circulate. La Galleria implemented new training programs for its staff, emphasizing inclusivity and respect. Chef Romano even invited Clara to a private dinner as a gesture of gratitude, an invitation she graciously accepted. For Daniel, the experience left a lasting impact. He began to approach conflicts differently, adopting his mother's method of measured, deliberate action. It wasn't always easy, but he found that her way often led to more profound results. As for Clara, she carried on as she always had, unassuming, kind, and unshakably strong. The events at La Galleria were just another chapter in her long life of quiet victories. To her, the true measure of strength wasn't in how loudly one demanded respect, but in how deeply one inspired it. And inspire she did, everywhere she went, and to everyone she met. In the end, Clara Hughes didn't need applause or recognition for her actions. She never did. Her strength was in the quiet dignity with which she carried herself, the respect she earned without ever demanding it. The lessons she imparted, not through grand speeches, but through her actions, would resonate far beyond that night at La Galleria. The world, as it often does, would continue its whirlwind pace. But for those who had witnessed the events unfold, especially her son, Daniel, and the staff at the restaurant, something had shifted. The most powerful moments in life weren't always the loudest. They were the ones that quietly changed hearts, one act of grace at a time. And so, Clara Hughes' legacy lived on, not in headlines or social media posts, but in the lives she touched, in the ripple of change that she had set into motion. Her example remained, like a steady beacon, guiding those who needed to learn that true power came not from exerting control, but from cultivating kindness, integrity, and respect. As for Clara, she continued to walk her path, her head held high, knowing that sometimes the most profound victories came in silence. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch and listen to this story. We truly appreciate your support and hope you found it as meaningful as we intended. If you enjoyed the journey and the lessons shared, don't forget to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, and hit the subscribe button for more stories like this. Your engagement helps us create even more content that inspires and connects us all. Thanks again for being a part of this experience, and we can't wait to share more with you soon.